Can you imagine going to your local park to have a picnic with your loved ones, and you're sitting down on the grass or laying down, just having a chill time, and you're ready to go, and you try and get up and you can't get yourself up because you feel like something is holding you down onto the ground? What if I told you it's because you're having your picnic on top of thousands of bodies, and those spirits want to keep you there with them? Well, that's the story of the local city park, Cheesman Park, here in Denver, Colorado. And we're going to talk about all of the spooks and haunts and histories that kind of surround the area. Mount Prospect Cemetery opened in 1858 and was originally a cemetery for like the Catholic Church. It was like 320 acres, and the whole thing, which I don't know, just a giant cemetery that was built when there wasn't really a city there to begin with in Denver, Colorado. Shortly after the cemetery was opened, the first 2 bodies were buried there. In 1859, when a man with O'Neill and a man named John Stoefel, these 2 guys, they were business partners, and for some reason things went bad, and O'Neill owed Stoefel money, and Stoefel wanted his money. They had some beef, and Stoefel killed O'Neill. And because there wasn't really any sort of like system set up yet, the town kind of like formed a lynch mob, and they not funny, it's not funny, I just laugh because I'm uncomfortable. They held like their own little trial for Stoefel after he killed O'Neill, and in doing so, the following day they held that trial under a cottonwood tree, and they hung Stoefel for his actions. And after both of them were dead, you know, not saying that O'Neill should have taken the money or whatever had happened, but definitely shouldn't have resulted in a murder. The community decided that they needed to bury these bodies, and so they chose to do so in Mount Prospect Cemetery. They dug one giant hole. They put O'Neill down in that hole. And then, you know what? We've already got this big hole. Let's just bury Stoefel with him. So they buried those 2 guys, the victim and the murderer, together. And I think that's kind of like what started all of the hauntings and stuff, because like that's bad juju. Not to mention the land there was initially owned by the Arapaho tribe, and people being people, they took that land or purchased it or whatever happened and turned it into the cemetery. So throughout the years, the cemetery expanded. There were sections for the Jewish community, Catholic community, other religious groups, and then they had sections for like paupers or the poor people, which is kind of where like people think all of the haunting came from. In 1872, after the city had grown a little bit, the city of Denver actually purchased Mount Prospect Cemetery from the church or whomever owned it at the time, and they turned it into a big cemetery for city use. It was used for a really long time. Lots of bodies were buried there. Thousands and thousands and thousands. And they used it for everything. People who, you know, died of natural causes, those that were because of crimes they had committed, things like that. It kind of just really like got out of control and stuff and turned into kind of a mess. The people expanded, they started moving closer, the city of Denver became more established, and they lived near the cemetery. And the people who owned the homes near the cemetery were kind of put off by how it looked. And so Denver or the people there, proposed that they would like to actually just change the land, and they wanted it to become a park instead of the cemetery that was there, because it was kind of an eyesore for them, and they were spending a lot of money at the time to live there and live in this established city. So they proposed that it get turned into a park to play and hang out. It took a while for them to get it there, because the city of Denver bought it in 1872, and then by 1880 they were like, you know what, actually let's turn this into a park. There are lots of houses here. And so then they hired E.P. McGovern. That guy. And he was an undertaker, and he was tasked with removing the bodies there and moving them to a cemetery that wasn't where everybody could see it all the time. And so city of Denver was like, hey, we'll pay you $1, like $90.93 for every body that you move to this new cemetery. And E.P. McGovern, he was like, heck yeah, man. So he got in there, hired a couple of guys to work with him, and they started to get to work moving these bodies from one cemetery to other ones throughout the city, just so they could change the land. Well, people are people, and he got greedy, and he was like, you know what, $1.93 per body. And side note, $1.93 back then, I did like the inflation of that. It's like $68 now, so per body he was getting that, which was pretty substantial at the time. He was like, I'm gonna get $1.93 for each body. And you know what he did? He decided that he was going to take each of these bodies, a saw and an axe, and just start hacking these guys up. Like, bad juju, dude. What are you thinking? So, started cutting people apart and stuffing their bodies into child-size coffins, which were like 3 feet big. And he learned that he could take one person, cut them up, and put them into 3 separate child-size coffins, which is sick. Way to curse the whole town, dude. And he did it. And he got away with it for a little bit. It said that there were initially believed to be like 5,000 bodies buried at the cemetery, and he managed to get quite a few out of there. And before people, onlookers, reporters started noticing that there were giant holes in the ground, and that there were workers cutting people apart, just pulling bones apart. It said at the time, like, if you walked past the cemetery, that you would be able to see just bones thrown around everywhere. Jewelry, clothing, it was just it was a huge mess, and bro was just gonna get away with it until other people started noticing this. The city of Denver found out. So they contacted the families, and they were like, yo, you guys have 90 days to collect your loved ones. So they gave them 90 days to collect their family members and move them to a cemetery of their choice, because the city of Denver didn't really want to deal with it anymore, I guess. Now, unfortunately, a lot of the people buried there and their families who were connected to them, I mean, they didn't have a lot of money or any idea of how to, like, move a body. So a lot of them didn't, and it was estimated that there's still 2,000 to 3,000 bodies buried underneath what is now Cheesman Park. So construction went on. They waited those 90 days for those people to get their family members out of the graveyard, and when they didn't, construction continued. they just decided, like, hey, we've got all these holes from all these empty graves and stuff, and it took them a long time to build this park. So the holes and stuff with open graves were just left like that for a really long time. And eventually they filled the holes in, put shrubs on top of old graves, took the grave markers away, so you couldn't really tell where anybody was after that. Oh, and a lot of the bodies were never moved because there were like smallpox outbreaks at the time, and they wanted to prevent the spread of disease that could come from the bodies. So that's another reason why. So these people died sick, and you left them there to put a park and walk on them. It's bad. It's really bad, guys. So shortly after the park was built, residents in the neighborhood and people who went to the park started like noticing weird things happening. There were things said, like in the 1890s, people who lived there reported seeing that there were spirits coming up to their doors, knocking on them, or even like peeking into their windows after all of this happened. I would not be able to sleep at night, but also like, how do I get a house there? Because that's, I mean, I like the house was number one, it's like my dream. Also, like, that's gotta be so freaky. As the years went on, things continued. More spirits were seen. There's been reports of a singing woman wandering the park, or children playing at night, but when you try and approach these people, they just disappear. Exactly. There's also, like, if you, even today, like, people have reported, like, if you walk through the park, you might see something darting between the trees, or suddenly just, like, running up to you and then just disappearing altogether. That would put off the picnic vibes for me, I don't know, but also look sick. Not in a good way. And fun fact, there's been multiple reports that if you go to the park, you decide to take a little lie down on the grass, you might have an issue trying to get back up. People have said that they feel like they're being held down to the ground by invisible hands, and then they're not allowed to get back up on their own for like a solid minute. Crazy. Because the spirits are angry. They were chopped into pieces. I'll be angry too. Okay, sorry. I had to step away for a second to do my eyeliner. I have to get all up in the mirror because I can't see what I'm doing. It's fine. Anyway, so some other things that have been reported, like occurrences that have happened there after the desecration of the corpses. I believe this was in like the 80s, but maybe even closer to that. 2 gentlemen were walking through the park one night, and one of the gentlemen was like hearing chains behind him rattling. Yeah. And he was like, hey dude, do you like hear that? His friend was like, no, I don't hear anything. And it just kept happening. And eventually there was like a kid riding along on a bike, had chains hanging out of his pocket. He rode away. And like, oh, that's probably what you heard. It wasn't. The 2 gentlemen continued their walk through the park and kept hearing sounds. And eventually they noticed this man who was approaching them, and he clearly had a broken jaw, like hanging off, and he was covered in blood, and said that he was wearing a hospital gown. And he walked up to these 2 men and asked them if they had a cigarette, like, and I mean, they had their conversation, and he was like, hey, did you like see who did this to me? And I guess he rolled up his sleeves and was like showing them that he had like 15 deep stab wounds on his body, and he was like bleeding. And they were like, dude, we need to like take you to the hospital. And he was like, no, I'm good, like I just want to find out who did this to me, like I'm gonna figure out who did this to me. And then bro vanished. Talk about a walk in the park. And you know what's even more wild is that the hauntings there weren't strictly at the cemetery. Like after all of this, the horrors that happened to the bodies there, it traveled outside of the cemetery. Like, it full on disturbed these spirits, and they wanted out, and they wanted to let you know that they were not happy. The hauntings affected homes in the area, like the Stoeper, one of the two, Reed Humphrey's home, which was built near the park in 1909 by Lena and Edward Stoeper. It was designed by them. They had paid somebody to help them build it. They had all these plans for their Victorian home that they really wanted. Unfortunately, throughout the planning and everything, Lena's husband, Edward, passed away. Not sure how he died, or Edward passed away. And it was said, Lena had a bit of a temper on her. But she continued on, and she finished the house's construction, built it, decided she didn't get along with her neighbors, and therefore Lena put a 12-foot wall up around the whole property. She did not want to talk to her neighbors. So she lived there for a while, and then eventually Lena remarried. So Lena remarried a man named Hugh Rudd. It's the Rudd house, not Hood. And so they were married for a while, and then Hugh went on a little trip to Europe and decided he was going to come back home to Lena. Well, unfortunately, Hugh did not choose the correct method of transportation, because Hugh was on the Titanic on the way back, and we all know how that one ended. So Hugh did not come back to Miss Lena, or he died the year that the Titanic came back on the Titanic. After that, the house went through a couple of owners and everything, and a couple of years ago, a woman moved into the home with her family, and she said that upon moving into the home, there were strange things that happened quite frequently. She could hear crying coming from inside her house, and it was not her family members or her husband. So she went downstairs to the dining room and found a woman who did not have a head crying in her dining room. And it's believed that this woman was one of the victims of E.P. McGovern. They believe that he or one of his workers chopped her body up. And the reason she does not even have a head in the afterlife is because they didn't bring that part back with her to the other cemetery. So she's not pleased, and she's upset about it. And she's haunting the houses now. I'm like, can you imagine? You're just chilling in your home, and all of a sudden you hear crying. You're like, oh, who's upset that I live with? And it's just some poor lady missing her head, sitting at your dining room table, crying. Like, how does that work? Not to be questioned in the afterlife, I guess. Just a side note, with all of the construction that had happened after, the park was already built and everything, and now downtown Denver is home to the Denver Botanical Gardens. So it's said that even when the gardens were first established or built in the 60s, they were still digging up bodies there. And it happened again when they added on to the Botanical Gardens in just the 2020s. They're still finding people buried there. And, we're gonna keep finding people there if there's 2,000 to 3,000 bodies underneath the soil. Fun fact. I don't know if you guys have ever seen the 1980s movie, The Changeling. I just watched it and I did a little research for this video. It was pretty good. It's definitely an 80s horror film, but I love all horror films, so sorry about that. My camera decided to throw a little tantrum. Anyway, so I watched The Changeling. It's actually based on a house here in Denver. But basically, the story is of the movie. This older gentleman is married, decides to take his family on a little vacation up in the mountains. Got a daughter and a wife with him. Their car breaks down. Had a little issue, so everybody's getting out to push. They're having a blast. And he steps away for a minute to go call roadside assistance. And while doing so, a construction, like a dump truck, is driving up the road and coming in pretty quickly while dude's making a phone call. His wife and daughter are just chilling by the car, and this truck comes hauling up the road and it's coming right for their car. And mom and daughter try to get out of the way, but they can't, and they're in front of the car, and it gets hit by the truck. And then, they didn't make it. So he has a whole like crisis and things, decides to move away from New York City out to the mountains. He moves to Seattle in the movie, and they call the house the Cheesman house. Cheesman, you know what they're doing there. So he moves there to this really old house that hasn't really been lived in for a really long time. It was taken over by the Historical Society. It's abandoned. And he moves in. Some weird stuff starts happening. Hearing sounds in the house. Doors are opening. All of that jazz. Well, he decides to hold a seance. Find out that there's like a little boy trapped in the house and all of this stuff. And that he needs to help like save him. Before leaving the house. Well, that's actually based on a story that happened at a home called the Henry Treat Rogers Mansion, which was built in Denver, Colorado. The house was built in 1839 by Henry Treat Rogers. He was a prominent lawyer at the time, wanted a nice house for he and his family to live in. They moved into the home, lived there for a really long time. He and his wife never had any kids, but they did have a niece and a nephew. And unfortunately, Henry passed away, and the wife kind of like adopted the niece, and the nephew, he grew up, so no recorded deaths of any children at the time. Now, as time passes by, the house goes through a couple of hands again. In the 1960s, a man named Russell Hunter, he's like a writer or something, he moves into the home. He's renting it for like $200 a month, which is a great freaking deal. Where do I get on that? But he moves into the house and lives there for a little bit. I think he was there for about a year, but then things started happening. Like, he would suddenly be woken up at 6 a.m. because there was like loud banging and crashing happening in the house while he was laying in bed. And so like Hunter says like as soon as his feet touched the ground at 6 a.m. the noise would just stop. And the longer he lived there, the weirder things got. Like faucets would just turn themselves on, or he would hear doors opening and closing. And so I guess one day this dude invites a friend over. They're just like chilling in the house, like looking around, doing some exploring, and they randomly come across a hidden staircase in the house, and the staircase leads up to this third floor attic space. So they climb on up those stairs, go into the attic, and what do they see? A trunk. Like, like one of those old school trunks that people keep their stuff in. They're kind of cool looking. Well, they go up to the trunk and they open it. And inside this trunk, they said that they found some old journals and like schoolwork books that belonged to a 9-year-old. And they found this out because Hunter said he read these journals and it talked about a 9-year-old boy who was disabled and ill, and talked about his favorite red ball and and they kind of just like put him up into this attic space to hide him away from the room, which unfortunately wasn't a super uncommon thing back in the day. Like, if you had a disabled family member, they would just, you know, like either send them away to live in like an asylum or something, or they build these areas in the home to just hide them away from people so they didn't have to see them, which is really sad. But apparently that's what was written in this journal, and he kind of like felt off about everything, and they left the attic, and a couple of nights later, Hunter is just hanging out, and all of a sudden a red ball falls down the spiral staircase in the house, which is strange because in the journal the little boy talked about his favorite toy being a red ball. And this is when Hunter was like, you know what, that's weird. So what do you do when things get weird? You hold a seance. Yeah, and you contact whatever is going on, because he wanted answers. Hunter holds this seance, and while this is happening, they're able to speak with someone. So basically, they hold this seance, and a spirit comes across, and it's a little boy, and he's like telling them about how, you know, the family that lived there was, like, not the family. The little boy was supposed to be inheriting like a big old sum of money. He was about to be that family's like payout, and they were excited. But unfortunately, he was pretty ill, and he ended up passing away. People being people, his parents were like, oh no, we don't want this money to get passed on to the next person, like, we want it. They took this poor little boy's body, and this is just what Hunter says happened, but he said that he was told that his body, the little boy's body, was taken to some field outside of Denver and just buried. And the family was like, you know what, we're still gonna get paid for this. So supposedly they went to an orphanage, and they found a little boy that matched theirs that they had. They adopted him, and they basically taught him to be their son so that they could still get their money. Hunter was like, you know, I don't feel good about that. And I guess while talking to this little boy, he was able to tell them, like, this is where my parents buried me. And so Hunter had to go through a couple like passageways and find a way to get permission to ask if he could dig in this like specific area. You know, eventually he did get the permission, and when they did go digging, he said that they found a little boy's body buried. And you know, so that happened, which is what inspired the movie The Changeling. Now, shortly after everything went on, Hunter moved out of the house. He just, you know, didn't feel good about being there anymore. And he said he never came back to the home until the 80s, when it was eventually demolished. And you know, who knows what happened with that afterwards. But yeah, basically, so like if it is based on the actual home there was never any recording of a little boy dying in the house or any of this happening. So, I mean, people are good at hiding stuff, so you don't know if that actually happened or not. Lashes. Nice. Anyway, so like, there's no way to know if that actually happened or not, but he said that it did. And when, I guess like when they went and dug up this little boy's body, they had found, you know, the bones, and then there was like a medallion buried with a little boy, and on it was the same name that Hunter said the little boy gave to him during the seance. So he believes that that's what happened. So he wrote the story down. Eventually the movie was picked up and created, you know, just like a couple years after he lived there. And that's how that happened. Gotta do lips, guys. It's really hard to talk while I'm doing that, but yeah. So I don't know, there's never any recording of a little boy being there, but you know, whether he was actually a resident at the home at some point in time, or there's a possibility that, you know, he was one of those poor unfortunate souls that was dug up, or maybe even never dug up at Cheesman Park, and he just found a place to haunt. Lots of connections, lots of spooky, scary stuff that happened after everything. It was just shuffled around, made angry. The final look. So, you know, kind of like what happens when you desecrate a cemetery, make it a place for a bunch of people to walk all around. You're gonna upset the spirits of the neighborhood, and strange occurrences are gonna start happening. That's the story of Cheesman Park and the occurrences around it. This is today's look. If you like the story that I've told you and you want to hear some more, go ahead and just give me a subscribe. I'll be back once a week. I'm going to try and upload every Friday. I'm going for one video with some sort of haunted history, ghosts, story, or lore of each state with a makeup look for you guys every Friday, starting this Friday, so please come back. If there's a specific story that you know about and you want me to talk about, just pop it down there and I'll add it to the list. If you have any questions about products that I used or just questions about me, you can either look in the description down below. I'll list everything that I used down there. And then like if you have any questions, just ask. I'll go ahead, I'll reply as much as I can. Yeah. Thank you for watching and coming, and I love you guys, and I'll see you next week. Bye!